Welcome back, Spokane, to another episode of EvoReal Talks. I'm Matt Side, one of your hosts.
And I'm Jessica Side.
The other one of your hosts.
That's right, the number 2 host.
I think you're the number 1
if we're
host.
ranking,
It depends on what you're most interested in.
Oh, that's true.
If it's history, she's the number 1 host.
So I have to say that having our studio in our dining room makes it challenging when your neighbors are trying to get their lawns mowed. I will say it's interesting because when we were in the actual radio studio, we didn't have that concern. But today we're like, I think we better wait.
You know what we did have those? We had fire engines and police cars that sometimes would echo through so, unless you're in like an actual recording studio that's soundproof, you're going to get that kind of stuff.
That's true.
Happy Father's Day to all of our fathers out there.
Indeed.
Not today, but tomorrow.
What you doing for Father's Day, hon?
We can do a little kayaking.
We're very excited.
It's our first...
Hopefully it's warm. Have you checked the weather?
I have not.
We're going to pretend like it's going to be warm enough.
Yeah, lest the weather be inclement, we plan to kayak.
That's correct.
Well, we have a couple of featured listings,
right.
Brand new listings on the market that I want to go over for people.
Great.
Both of them are land listings. They are both 20-acre parcels.
I hear they're not making any more of that.
The land?
That's correct.
I don't think they
Unless
are.
we move to Mars?
Yeah, so it's going to be a while. Let's start with the one on Corkscrew Canyon Road. These don't have addresses because they're unimproved property. There is power at the property line, so it's not like it's way out in the middle of nowhere and you're having to bring power way in. So $85,000. This is up in the Tum Tum area, so head out 9 Mile toward 9 Mile Falls, past Suncrest, kind of follow that around by Long Lake. This is a really cool property because it is in the hills above Long Lake, but it really is only 1.5 miles to the Lake Spokane campground and the boat launch.
Oh, cool.
So,
okay.
I mean, you could use this in multiple ways. It could obviously be a current or future building site. It could be just a place that you camp.
Camp, right.
And either way, you're really close to the lake.
And how many acres did you say this was?
20 acres.
Wow, that's great.
85,000.
I love that.
Power is available at the road with the southern property line. And there is cell service available, but it's limited, so it's not going to be like a high-speed situation, probably.
Okay, we can't set up our studio there?
No, probably not. Probably not. So if you're interested in that property, give us a shout. We can give you more details on how to get there and take a look at it. We also have one on Riverbend Way in the Fruitland area. So giving everybody some context, this is north of Davenport on Highway 25.
Okay.
So you're going across the river a ways north, so it's a little bit below Hunters.
Okay. Up
that way. So a little further north. Power is available at the road. Lots of deciduous trees. Views that go on forever. Also 20 acres. So a couple different building site opportunities there. So also reach out to us, 509-62-HOUSE, or send us a message on the social media channels, EvoReal. Just search for EvoReal. And we can give you directions on how to get there. We can give you more details if you're interested in building, kind of like what that might look like. I know that building and construction materials are tight, but lumber prices are starting to come down. And the reality is with inventory so tight, maybe this is a good opportunity for someone to have a little bit of a future property to...
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's...
Oh, and that one was... Did I say that one was $75,000, the one in Fruitland?
You did not. But I do think that people think in terms of future use. Like, they go, hey, I could use it for this now, and then potentially in the future, I could build on it. And even if you don't build on it,
the reality is they're not making it anymore. and it's a place that you can even... At those price points, some people could even just buy that and hold it for the right time. So... So there you go. That's some real estate stuff to start us off.
Thank you very much.
You have some interesting real estate stuff you want to talk about.
I do. Today. I found an article last week. I'm going to actually tell you. So it's on Vox, VOX, and it's written by Jerusalem Demsis, I believe is how you say the name. And it was a very interesting article. So we are going to discuss it. The question in the article, the title of the article is there a housing bubble? Okay, now...
I'd like to know that.
This question is something that we get asked all the time and that we ask ourselves a lot, right? Because we're trying to figure out, The article was great because it made me feel not so bad about not knowing the answer.
Sure.
Experts who study recessions don't even feel confident in answering this question. So today we're gonna dive into this article. I'm gonna outline it. I'm gonna give you some of the quotes, and we're gonna discuss some of those things. I have
Awesome.
not discussed this with Matt yet, so all of this is new to him. So it'll be kind of interesting to see. I'm happy for you to jump in, ask questions.
Oh, don't worry. I'm sure
Make
I will.
comments. I'm sure you will do that. Okay, so first thing we have to do is we have to define what is a bubble. Okay?
Yeah.
So, in everyday conversation, it appears to mean prices have gone up a lot, and I think they're going to come crashing down again. Okay? So that's a really basic definition. If you ask this is a quote. Ask two Nobel Prize winning economists, and the answer is blunt. It's impossible to know for sure whether something is a bubble. I'm like, okay.
So the idea behind the bubble is not like an up and a down. It's an up and a kind of an explosion. Like it
Yes.
pops, right?
Yes.
So it's kind of expand, and then boom.
Right.
Instant contraction.
Another quote from the article was, a bubble is a time when price increases in some markets and attract a lot of attention. And then this is later on, it says a sort of epidemic of an idea. Okay, now hold on that concept of an epidemic of an idea. Okay, so I want to read that again. A bubble is a time when price increases in some markets attract a lot of attention. So it's not just the increase; it's the attention that it attracts. Okay, we're going to come back to that concept in just a minute. Okay, so there are lots of items that have bubbles. The used car market. Having a hard time figuring out how to say that. Used car market has a bubble right now. Okay, it's actually seen like 100% increase, or no, 50% increase in like a year. But things like organic tomatoes can have a bubble. Okay, so a lot of times we think of the bubble as a housing bubble, but there are bubbles in every possible market. So why the obsession with the housing bubble? Why is that such an obsession with people? Well, it's pretty simple.
Because we can leverage housing so heavily?
Maybe. Also, it is people's greatest asset. So if there's a bubble in organic tomatoes, what? You have a little bit of pocket change that you don't get because now your tomatoes have gone from $2 a pound to $3 a pound?
You just don't make salsa that week.
You just don't make salsa that week? Yeah. But housing bubble, we're talking about our greatest asset where we keep a lot of our future equity, and potentially we live on that money. There's all kinds of things. So that is why we have such a obsession with it in this country. So Matt, my question is, when was our last housing bubble?
Well, early 2000s is what I think of.
Right. So what, like 2000?
07?
Yes.
07 was kind of that peak point.
Correct. And so we're going to be referring to that for the rest of our time. We're going to be referring to that as the Great Recession. Okay. So if we say the Great Recession, we're talking about that 2000 and I'm just going to say 2007 and the surrounding years.
Yeah, it was 7, 8, 9 were kind of the biggest.
So a lot of people blame that recession on the risky behavior from Wall Street.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is where a lot of people will lay the blame for that particular thing. So let's talk about stock prices. Again, we're still answering the question of how do you define a bubble? Okay. So stock prices. So when I say that, so let's talk about the Great Recession for just a second. I just said that you can't define what a bubble is. But they kind of mean you don't know when you're in the middle of a bubble.
Okay.
It is impossible to know whether you're on a bubble or not, right? Okay. But when hindsight is 2020, right? So we can see that there was a housing bubble during that time. But even during that time, if you watch The Big Short, a couple of people knew that it was coming down, but very few people.
Yeah, and they just got lucky in their predictions because I guarantee there are people that are predicting bubbles when they don't happen to.
Correct. Okay, so let's talk about stock prices for a second. Harvard economist Robin Greenwood and his fellow researchers looked at 40 times when stock prices increased over 100%. Okay. 40
different times.
40 different times, stock increases were up over 100%.
Okay.
He said they found, and this is a quote, sharp price increase does not on average predict unusually low returns going forward. So every
Meaning that
time
every time it shoots up does not mean that it
it's
also
going to plummet.
comes down.
Correct.
Which is one of those things that you just hear over and over and over again. What goes up must come down.
Yes, exactly.
And that isn't always true.
That's
not true in this scenario.
Again, every single one of these quotes that I've been talking about, these are like Nobel Prize winning economists. These are, they're all economists. This is not just like the person in the article making this stuff up. They're doing interviews and things like that. So I think it's important for us to understand that. But bubbles, so what this is saying is that bubbles are more than what this is saying is that bubbles are more than price increases within sharp declines. It also is accompanied by frenzied ethos, okay, which is integral to the definition. So a frenzied ethos, going back to what I talked about before, when I talked about an epidemic of an idea. Okay. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So I want to take us back 20 years ago. 20 years ago, you were meeting with your real estate mentor, and sometimes you and I would meet with our real estate mentor, right? Yeah. And I remember a time when he talked about, he didn't use the word hype, but now that, that's a word that we would use now, but he talked about self-fulfilling prophecies. He had basically collected all of these news articles that said Spokane market is hot. Spokane market is going up. Spokane market. And he said, we're not really seeing much of this, but I believe, and he kept collecting all these articles, that it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, that people are going to see the article and start proving that article to be true by their behavior.
Interesting.
Okay, so, and this is in contrast to what we're talking about now. We're talking about the ethos, right, of, it's all gonna go down.
Right.
It's an epidemic of an idea that gets lodged into people's heads that we're in a housing bubble. So it becomes potentially a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is making sense now?
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
In contrast with would you say that so is what you're trying to say that because people are talking about a housing bubble, it could potentially create a housing bubble?
Yes.
But who's talking about a housing bubble? Because most people are just talking about out of control inflation and the skyrocketing in values.
I think if we were probably to look up a bunch of articles on housing, are we in a housing bubble, we would find a lot of information about that. And people, again, in private conversations, people are asking that question of us.
Sure.
Our brokers are asking that question of us.
It's in the back of everybody's mind.
Correct. So in other words, bubbles are not just the technicality of going up and going down. It also, part of that formula is an epidemic of an idea, a frenzied ethos, right? Like a mind meld of everyone kind of believing that same thing could come about. Now, in this particular 20 years ago, it was a positive thing, right? We were talking about markets going up. In this case, we're talking about markets going up. So our mentor was teaching us.
You just said markets going up both times.
Oh, we're talking about markets going down.
Okay.
Up and then
So
down.
we actually had a bubble though last time.
Correct.
But nobody was talking about it. It just happened.
Right. Well, when we were talking about it, we were talking like in the year 2001.
Right.
In the markets. And remember what happened in 2005 and 2006. Woo! Everything went way up. Yeah. So that momentum and that self-fulfilling prophecy and people going, I better buy a house now because the market is going up, right? Sure. It's happened. So without knowing it, he was teaching us at that time about the ethos and how powerful that mind meld is. Okay. So in general, what people are looking for to determine whether or not you're in a bubble is a fast price appreciation, but it needs to be attached, at least in some way, to a fundamental reason why prices increase or decrease normally. Okay, so for instance, supply and demand. That's a normal reason
for prices to go up.
For prices to go up, right, or to go down. So economists have yet to figure out how to decide if this is a housing bubble. So, warning: be suspicious of anyone that tells you absolutely certainly we are in a housing bubble or we are not in a housing bubble, because we're talking about Nobel Prize winning economists saying,
I don't know,
there's no way to predict this. So interesting. So the bottom line for are we in a bubble, which is the first question that we had to ask, is no one really knows if we're in a bubble or not. because because prices that have risen dramatically doesn't by definition mean that they will sharply decrease. Okay. All right. So now let's go into two different arguments that are approached in
as
this
to
article.
whether or not we're going to be in a bubble.
I'm going to tell you what they are.
Two arguments.
Two arguments.
Surprise arguments.
So the first argument is that we might be in a housing bubble, but it will be different from the Great Recession. So this argument says we are in a housing bubble, but the end of that housing bubble, when it pops, we're going to be in a different place. Okay. So the first question we have to ask ourselves in this argument is, why are prices going so high? Okay. Number one, you're going to know this one really well. Millennials are in their prime house buying age and overcame the baby boomers in 2020 for just number of people.
Which is incredible.
Yes.
Because the baby boomer generation was so huge.
That's correct. And of course, part of that is the baby boomer generation. Some of them are passing away, right? So that is part of it is a decrease on one end of the spectrum, and the sustained, because they're not making any more millennials as far as I know. They've all been born. So that's a big one. Okay.
So and you may not know the answer to this question, but isn't this the statistic that are there more millennials than there ever were boomers, or is that saying that there are currently more millennials than boomers?
In 2020, they finally overcame them in population.
Got it. Okay. So that statistic for me has been a little bit lost, because it always felt like they were saying there are more millennials than there are boomers, but that's not.
It was that they were approaching that tipping point. Okay, and we've kind of been talking about that for probably about 4 years, I would say. But it finally actually had the tipping point. So number two, so again, these are why are prices going up. Number two, the Fed bought over $1 trillion in mortgage bonds last year. And so that security of the housing market was widely seen as a stabilizing force.
Sure.
Okay, so they were able to take that debt on, which means that now more banks can give out loans.
Yeah.
Okay. Number three, rates are super low. Again,
that's driven somewhat by that bond market. That's
correct. So that is a stabilizing force. So in people's mind is what they're saying, buy quickly before rates go up. So where a millennial or anybody else, right, was kind of hanging on, seeing what was going to happen. Now they're seeing it like, whoa, we're at the bottom and I need to buy now. So there's that happening.
So not only do we have a huge population of millennials, but that population of millennials is feeling an urgency to get into the housing market.
Right. And there's stability in that housing market because of this 1 trillion, let's not forget the epicness of that in those mortgage bonds. Okay, so now the next question. So that's those are some 3 reasons why the mortgage prices, or not mortgage, but the prices are going so high. Okay. Why might this be different than the Great Recession? Why is this going to be, if it pops, why are we going to have potentially more stability? Number one, after the horribleness of the Great Recession, banks said, okay, we need to tighten up. Because what happened was, right, is that prices went down. And then if you needed to sell, if you had some hiccup in your life, then they're taking back those houses, and now there's a glut of foreclosures, and banks are just like drowning in them. I remember at the time we were doing short sales, and I remember that we had we would talk to people, asset managers is what they were called, and they would say that they had 200 files on their desk, one person, 200 files, and they were all short sales or things that were getting ready to go into foreclosure. Yeah. That's crazy.
It was a ridiculous.
So here's what they did. They tightened up the credit scores. So banks went from 600 points in credit that in your credit score that you could get a loan, and now it's gone up to 657. Okay, so they're saying we're not going to be giving loans to people in a certain strata of credit. Okay, so there's more stability there. Number two, people are more qualified are more qualified now than they were in 2005 and 2006. Back then, anyone could get a loan. They were letting people do stated income, which basically means you could lie about how much income
Stated
you made.
income and stated assets.
Sure, you just
So
say.
you just wrote it all down. And the reality was, living through that time,
Mhm.
like that was the thing where you would hear these conversations.
Mhm.
How much money do you make? And the question right back was, how much do I need to make? Like that was the reality. Like, what do I need to get this loan? And I will write it on this.
Right.
Or really, I mean, there was a lot of like fraud type stuff going on where it would be like, why don't you go ahead and put $120,000 a year on that income, and we won't have any trouble
Yes.
getting this loan approved.
Yes,
It was
and
just
a lot of that was happening in California too, because people couldn't afford to get a loan in California. You couldn't. I mean, how are you going to? How is a normal person, an everyday person, going to get a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house for $1 million? It's just not going to happen. So they stated, and then what they were doing is they were banking on continuing the upward trend in
well,
their
they
equity.
also had interest-only loans. They had
Right.
negative amortization loans
Right.
because you would amortize it backwards. So that would mean that your loan balance would go up every month instead of come down every month.
Mhm.
But again, they were banking on the
Appreciation.
unlimited appreciation.
Correct.
Nobody cared about paying off your mortgage and your monthly payment because you'd make $200,000 next year in appreciation.
Right. So because of the Great Recession, a lot of those things were tightened up. There were regulations that went into place, and it really was to help protect the public because, trust me, it was a real bummer when those people were having to do short sales or going into foreclosure. Okay, so number 3 reason why this could be different from the Great Recession is savings accounts have gone up. Savings rates have gone up to 32.2%. People are saving money.
So I actually have a chart that I found on that because I was the Fed chair had some comments yesterday about the Federal Reserve meeting,
Mm-hmm.
and personal savings rates in the United States since 2000. So they usually bounce around 5 to 7%.
Okay.
At the beginning of the pandemic, they went up to about 33%.
33, okay.
And they fluctuated. Currently, as of April, it's 15%. But what it is
still
it's
way up.
a percentage of disposable personal income,
Mm-hmm.
which means it's fluctuating every single month on what percent people are saving. But the lowest it got was about 14% since the beginning of 2020.
Wow.
So that's part of the whole like just general inflation is that you've got this pent up demand and the capacity to spend money without the supply behind it. So savings accounts are at an all-time high, I would guess.
Savings accounts are at an all-time high, which means if I have a bump in the road, I don't have to stop paying my mortgage payments. Okay?
Interesting. Unless, yeah.
All right, number 4. You have something to say
Well,
on
I was
that?
just going to say, maybe it just means you put more money down on your house, but you still leverage yourself on your monthly payment as high as you always have.
There you go.
So,
who knows?
Time shall tell.
Yes. So number 4 is that homeowners have plenty of savings and have accumulated. So, no, sorry, that was number 3. No, number 4 is that we have accumulated nearly $1.5 trillion in equity since the end of 2019 as a country. $1.5 trillion in equity. That's major. So again, even if there's a sharp downturn, a lot of people will still have equity. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that, of course, depends on when you buy your house and all that.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm sorry.
So,
I'm not trying to undermine the reasons why this is different. Because
no.
Is.
And again, this is information from an article. And the whole point is to have this conversation and to see what our thoughts are compared to what the information is. So the bottom line for why this time will be different, even if there is a bubble that will be able to weather the storm, the marginal home buyer is wealthier and more secure than the lead up to the Great Recession. Okay? So that's the argument of, yes, okay, so let's say we are in a housing bubble, which we've defined kind of, okay, we've kind of basically defined, but the economists tell us that there's no way to know. So we don't really know. But if we are, even the people who are the marginal, okay, I'm going to use that in quotes, marginal home buyer is still having to buy at a 657 credit score. Thank you. They are more qualified. They've got 32% in savings, and they have a bunch more equity. Okay, so those are the arguments for that. Now, the next argument and my last argument that I want to go over is that we are not in a housing bubble at all.
Would you agree that these are such generalized statements
Mhm.
that what you're talking about here is for the entire United States
Correct.
versus certain regions?
Absolutely.
And I think we have to take these principles and
Mhm.
apply them regionally as well.
Yes, I actually do, and that's something that we won't dive into it, but it's definitely something to take into consideration.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, tell us why we're not in a bubble,
Okay.
Jess.
So the biggest contributor to the rise of prices right now is low supply. Low supply is the reason why
Yeah.
prices are skyrocketing. Okay. So a Freddie Mac report found in 2018 that the housing shortage was 2.5 million homes in 2018.
Okay.
In 2020, that number skyrocketed to 3.8 million homes. That's a major, major thing. So why are some of the reasons why we have such a low supply?
Yeah.
Number one, regulations. We have strict regulations in the U.S. around building.
It's harder to build.
Yep.
Okay.
Where you're building, the zone, the zones that you're building in, all those kinds of things. Number two, remote work. It allowed a small portion of the population to relocate to cheaper markets where they can easily outbid locals. So that remote situation caused lots of people to come into this area,
Mhm.
or at least even the idea of it,
Yeah.
and they are outbidding. They're 100% bringing cash, and you're going, how do you have $500,000 in cash? Well, it's because they sold something in Arizona or California or Seattle, and they've got a bunch of cash. Number three, experts.
Or New England, because I was looking at this just this week.
Mhm.
The United Van Lines 2021 moving report, like where people are leaving and where they're coming to.
Yeah.
The highest exit areas are Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut.
Wow.
Top 4 places that people are
Wow.
fleeing. Idaho is the number 1 place people are moving to.
Right. Okay.
Anyway,
Now that's great. That's very interesting. So again,
Oregon was number 3, by the way. Washington was way down at like number 13. But
okay. So number three, experts are also saying that a bubble could be very sub-local. Good job, Matt.
yes.
Not the whole country, the whole state, but a part of the state. And they are predicting in this article, they're predicting that where there are second homes is a big factor, that might see a bigger bubble than the others, because I don't know exactly why they're predicting that particular.
I mean, well, here's the reality that if you've got 2 houses and you do have a bump in the road, which one are you getting rid of? Not the one that you live in
Yes.
90% of the time.
Sure.
And that's why second homes are a little bit more expensive. You have to have a little higher down payment. They're higher
Right.
risk.
Sure.
Because if you're
Higher
gonna
risk for the bank.
for the bank, if you're going to give something back to the bank or let it go into foreclosure, it's going to be the place on the lake, not the place that you and your family live most of the time next to your work.
Sure. So the fourth reason why they're saying that we're not in a housing bubble at all, and that is all about supply. So we're talking about things that contribute to supply.
Okay.
Number 4 is the rise of lumber prices. Has created, people are like, I don't want to build right now. I would like to wait and see if the prices come down. Okay, so the article basically concludes with this. Okay. That whether we are calling it a housing bubble or not, the current situation is untenable. They say it's unhealthy, unstable, unacceptable state of affairs, and was entirely preventable. Okay. So let me just say this. The bottom line for the argument that we are not living in a bubble right now is that supply and demand has brought us to a place and there is no going back. In other words, we just need more houses. There's not going to be a big bubble burst because we still are short 3.8 million houses in the United States, places for people to live, according to that study.
Yeah. So
Now,
which creates a sustainability in that. Absolutely.
So in this article, they then conclude with some things that you need to change zoning laws, that we need to have higher density, and that local regulations are the biggest problem. I don't know how I feel about their final conclusion to this, but
I think density is an important piece. Like, you got to fill in.
Yep, absolutely. So
well, thank you for sharing all that.
You're welcome.
It's a question we get all the time.
It is, and it's something that we should look into, and it's something we should continue to watch and listen, so we can continue to learn. So. Thank you for being with us today. If you have any questions, call us at 509-62-HOUSE. You can reach us on social media, Facebook, EvoReal, EVOREAL, or info@everreal.com. Thanks
Thanks,
everybody for
everybody.
being here.